The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
Welcome back to Mission Minded. He is Michael Coleman, part of Alabama Food Bank, right down there in beautiful Montgomery. And while we're doing the show, we're fixing to get hit by a Hurricane Helene. I guess we do the show on Thursday, so Godspeed and best of luck to everyone down there in the southern part of our state. Of course, it's a little bit more east, thank goodness, but thinking about you and, of course, the folks down there. And we'll talk about hurricane relief on Bite by Bite coming up right after this show. And, of course, you can hear both these podcasts wherever you get your favorite podcast. We're available on every major indice. But you wanted to get into some interesting stuff today that I thought was we were kind of shooting the bull here before we got started here. We were talking about retirement, first of all, which I think is really interesting. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out lately about retirement. It's interesting because there's a lot of strikes going on right now, which I think is really interesting. And for the majority of us, I'm not sure what the numbers are. I think I saw like 18% of Americans have some type of pension. I having not been in a situation where I'm not part of a union and I don't have a pension, I've always really been kind of jealous of that. I got a friend of mine who's was a police officer, and he just retired at the age of 43. And now he's getting a check every month. Now, it's not enough to really live off of, but if he wanted it to. But for the rest of his life, he's getting a big fat check every month. I had a brother of mine work for General Electric up in Cincinnati. He gets $6,000 for the rest of his life every month, and he doesn't have to do anything. And that sounds really good. Now, he didn't really enjoy the job he was working when he was working it. So go figure. But yeah, just the little bit of the retirement thing. And then you kind of added a little caveat to it. What was that?
Well, there's a whole psychology behind it that I've personally experienced, and the people I work with, particularly, which, I work with industry leaders, but also from the worker, the blue collar perspective on a lot of that. And it's just interesting, just my own journey on that. So when I went to the military at 18 years old, last thing in the world I thought about was, why does a retirement matter? Because we all, when we're 18, 19, 20 years old, and the truth of the matter is my mother and my father didn't have retirements. They didn't have pensions and really didn't have any savings to speak of up until they had passed away. They're both pretty dependent on Social Security. I do have a pension because of my time on active duty military, and I cannot begin to say how helpful that's been over the years, especially when I was starting a nonprofit and working, and to have that amount. And like you said, it's not enough to live on, but it's certainly enough to give you a little bit of certainty, a little bit of stability. And I started drawing that at 39 years old when I retired. So I've been on the government tip for 19 years now. So, no, it's really a blessing. And the truth of the matter is there are some things like defending the country and putting your life on the line and all that, where hopefully you don't have to do that, but that's part of the incentive of getting people to do it, leave their home and do it and fight. And, for somebody like me at the time, I didn't have a lot of choices. Yeah. I was going nowhere fast. And so the Army was a great blessing to be able to have that. But I had no concept, no ability to see into the future and understand why this was so vital. I find this fascinating because you're giving me a lot of ideas. I want to back it up just a little bit. Okay. Because you were talking about your mom and dad. My dad was a newspaper distributor. He threw newspapers for his life. And you're like, Lord, four kids, wife to provide for, and threw newspapers for 37 years. And didn't have a pension, didn't have retirement. I remember whenever we had lamb, man, it was a special event when we had lamb in our family. We'd have city chicken on a stick. We had all this, shit on a shingle. We had, chick beef on toast. Yeah. And
Loved it. I never thought, I never looked at my neighbors, never looked at anyone else. Of course, all of our neighbors were kind of in the same boat as well. But the way we did things, I mean, people were like, well, how did you live then? Well, back then you had a job. You were happy to have one job. Gosh, some people had two. And if you had two jobs, you were really blessed. Now you can have as many jobs as you want. But you had one job and you worked at it, and you usually did the same thing for a long period of time with the same company, if you were fortunate enough to be with the same company. And while you were paying your bills, you were putting equity into your home, which was normally a 30-year note. And then by the time you got to be old enough to retire, you had a little money saved. Hopefully things got better, and you were living in a house where you weren't having a mortgage payment. So your expenses were much lower than they are. And so you went from like $6,000, $7,000 a month in expenditures to say $1,500, maybe it was just, whatever it was, because most of your stuff's paid for and you're invested in everything else. And that's how you got by. And most people like that. And now, you had children. And obviously through the generations, they had done really well. And so if you needed a little help, I think sometimes it's kind of gotten the other way around. Now I'm looking at my kids going, you're going to have to take care of my ass. It used to be, hey, mom and dad, can we help us out? I took care of you for 20 years. You better be ready to kick back some when I'm 73 in the nursing home. And hopefully if in fact it gets to that point, there's enough there. But I just kind of wanted to, because I don't think we live that way anymore, do we? We don't live that way anymore. I mean,
no, that was kind of the paradigm for everybody, or at least what you aspired to. So I had a little bit of a crazy upbringing. Went through a couple of different stepfathers. My mom married when I was in the 5th grade, married a retired military man. So he had a retirement coming in. But again, in 5th grade, you have no concept. I mean, it's like, yeah, he's got military, but so what? You don't understand the emotions of why that matters. And then their marriage failed my senior year, and she ended up many years later marrying a man who had a city retirement from the city of Dothan. And so that's the way it was. You were looking for pensions. And then what companies decided was, look, we can't, the longer people live, we can't afford pensions and city governments for people who would live. They would retire like me at 38 or 39 after. I mean, I had a friend who worked for the state of Alabama, for 21 years or 20 years, and he retired, and he goes right into being a handyman, but he just gets that check, and he didn't have to put anything into it.
Yeah.
And so what they realized was this is not sustainable forever. Mm-hmm. So they started shifting to things like 401ks, 403bs, all those kind of things. And, we offer a 401k here, and then it gets into, okay, well, if I can are you going to match any of it? And then, that whole tension that exists. But basically it means as long as you work for a company and they offer that benefit, you'll get that savings. But I think in our plan, the way it works, the first year, like from the very beginning, you can invest your paycheck into our 403b. Mm-hmm. We will begin to match it after 1 year, dollar for dollar, up to 5%. But if you of the money that we put in, you're only vested in that. In other words, you only get to keep that. If you quit after 1 year and we've put, let's just say 5,000, you only get to keep 30% of that.
Yeah.
And the rest of it would come back. And then you work 2 years and you get to keep 66, and so there's all sorts of little caveats as to how people set up these plans. But the bottom line, it all came about was because people recognize people are living longer. There's just not that many places that have pensions anymore. And I'm not looking at just making on my military. I'm saving in my 401k, and I'm hoping Social Security. I mean, I'm 58. At one time I thought Social Security may not be around. I'm pretty confident it's going to be around for us, but certainly don't know if it's going to be around for our children. They're going to have to do some different things to keep it soluble. But anyway, said all that to say, yeah, there used to be a certain thing that everybody grew up in, and now there's all sorts of different perspectives and ways to look at that, and ways to to handle your retirement.
Yeah, see, we had 401k, and when 401k started, I remember thinking, I think I started when I was like 23 or 24. And then when I was in my 40s, I started doing the math and thought, man, if I had started just 1 year earlier, it would have been double what it was. And it was hard to believe. It would have been, I mean, you got to think about that because you always think you're going to end up making 6 or 7 figures down the road, and you're putting in, 5, 6, 7%. And I cannot stress this enough for anyone listening to the show that's young enough to do it. Max out whatever you can, particularly if they're matching it.
Absolutely. No matter what it is, put in enough to get the free money.
It's free. It's free money. It's free money. Right. Max it out. And try to keep your hands off it. And But
Tony, I would tell you what's so fascinating when I was talking about the psychology of it. I only understand this perspective a little bit because I've been working with people in poverty. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about the hidden rules of different classes. And for those of you who may be new to the show or whatever, it's just the concept. And this didn't originate with me. It came from a book called A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Dr. Ruby Payne, that basically each class of people, you grow up with certain rules. And those rules are not, you can't go to the library and say, I want to live in the middle class. What's a book with all the rules? You learn that from your parents, reinforced by teachers and church leaders, all that kind of stuff. And that's why it's much easier for the middle class to go in the workforce and sustain that, because the rules of the workforce are middle class and it's things we understand, we adapt to. Well, I said all that to say that people in poverty, their rules are vastly different. Their rules are about how to survive in poverty. And so, of course, Hyundai Motor Manufacturing is here in Montgomery, and I was talking with their HR several months ago, and we were just talking about the difficulty of getting people to work. And one of the things they mentioned to me was, we can't get their 401. People don't care about the 401s. Now, these are line workers, blue collar workers. And they talk about, we have a robust retirement plan, but to our online workers, not our executives, but our online workers, they're like, I don't like it. I don't understand it. I don't want it. And they use that as a big draw. And I said, well, I've studied people in poverty. I've done ministry and different programs with people in poverty. I think I have an answer for you if you're genuinely looking for an answer. And they said, sure, what is it? And I said, people in poverty are surviving in the moment. And the idea that you're going to hold back part of their paycheck for a time 40 years from now is silliness to them, even though they for sure have grandparents or parents who are retirement age and are drawing Social Security and that's all they have. They don't have any savings. They still can't adapt to that and think like, okay, I don't want to be in that shape. I'm going to make sure that I save. No, it's typically, of course, there are exceptions, but it's typically the same thing. And it's a little bit of the reason to why, number one, it's so hard to climb out of poverty, but number two, things like retirement and even preparing for death that we do is so different. Like, it causes the middle class to continue to advance forward or obtain wealth, whereas death and poverty continues to lay a new burden. Let me give you one example. When I have a will, and when I thought about this, I said, okay, whatever I have, I don't know what I'll have, but whatever I have will be left 100% to my wife. If she goes before me, it'll be 100% be left to my two daughters, and, at 50-50. Unless they make me mad. And then I say, I'm all right, you down to 48% now. But when I go, I'm going to make sure I have enough life insurance to not only pay for my funeral services, but to pay any outstanding debts that I have. Hopefully, I could die debt free. Don't know. but in other words, my death is not going to be a financial burden on them. In fact, I didn't have a huge windfall when hardly nothing with my mother. When my dad died, we got a little bit of money. I finished paying off my student loan. It was a real blessing. When they will get assets when I die, no doubt. But in poverty, what I see so often is when a family member dies, again, they don't value thinking into the future. And so what happens is they don't carry things like life insurance. When you have just enough money to get by all the time, you're not willing to spend even $10 a month on a life insurance, a $3,000 life insurance policy. So I cannot begin to tell you the number of people that have sat in a morgue while their family goes around the community trying to raise enough money to bury them or have them cremated. And it's just not there. So death and poverty, because of that, not planning for retirement, not collecting assets and resources, even on a smaller level, oftentimes passes generational debt forward and burden forward. Whereas the middle class, because we're preparing for that, we oftentimes pass wealth along. And what over time, if you just look at it from that perspective, people in the middle class will continue to, if you were to chart that out, passing down that wealth, they will continue to use that wealth and parlay that into assets or whatever. Whereas poverty stays right there at that bottom line. And so the gap gets further and further. And that's a whole different, financial, sociological, psychological discussion. But
Michael, we were talking before the show. We were trying to figure out, because you thought I had an idea and I thought you had an idea. This is exactly the idea we spoke about last week. Was the social economic, the philosophy of we talked about last week. Let's talk about that next week. And you just fell into it about the mindset of a person who is born into poverty, who is raised into poverty, who lives into poverty. In a weird, it's like it's blissful from the standpoint that they're just so happy. I remember, and it was funny. I stopped at Publix last night to look at some steaks. And I don't think I ever saw my dad happier when he had an opportunity to buy a side of beef from someone on his route. Someone got behind in their paper route, and he owed my dad, I don't know, $100, something like that. And he worked for a meat company downtown Cincinnati. And my dad came home with a side of beef. And I don't think my dad was as happy as I've never seen him that happy. He had a side of beef. We were so happy. He was like, we spent the whole night cutting up steaks. And my dad just had the biggest smile on his face because he had my mother. She was up till 3:00 in the morning cutting steaks and putting those things in the freezer because we were going to be eating meat for the rest of our lives. And my dad got it for nothing. And I mean, that was just the kind of thing, we live paycheck to paycheck. And, But I want you to talk a little bit about this, not to throw you off the idea that you're already going into. It's early in the show, but when you don't know wealth, and you see this a lot. I've got a friend of mine who's lived paycheck to paycheck, and 3 different times in his life, he has been given amounts of check. He got like a $30,000 check from an uncle that he didn't even know. He got a $40,000 check from someone else in his family that he wasn't even aware of. And this is a guy that was living in his car. And then they found out that they discovered oil in his land, of all things. It was like Uncle Jed, it was like the Beverly Hillbillies. And he got like a $60,000 check for someone to come in and look on his land. He owned a partial of land. It was his mom and dad's land. He got the partial land. It was sitting there, just had weeds and stuff on it. Wasn't going to build a house or anything on it. It was like a tract of land. And each and every time he got the money, he was broke within months.
Oh, yeah.
And he had no money ever. And I'm like, how did you just go through $60,000? Yeah. Because he just never had money in and he just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. So part of it is that if you grow up in poverty, you really don't know what to do with money. But I will tell you what and I probably could find statistics. This is one of these, it's true because it's in my gut. I believe it to be true. Mm-hmm. I think so many people get into retirement age, not because there's not resources or not because they didn't have it. It's because we live in a world where we want instant gratification and we are not willing to deny ourselves for the sake of what may happen in 20, 30, 40 years. Now, when I was in the military and my wife was not working, she stayed home to take care of the kids until she went to go to school. We had so many months that we were eating green beans the last, couple of days to make it. I mean, I've lived that life.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally it wasn't that I wasn't, that's all we were doing was sacrificing. Now, now that we're way more established, the kids are gone, we're not nearly as frugal or think in terms of that. But through that, it would be easy to go, oh, we've got this money. Well, let's just start traveling. Let's do this. Let's do that. And, the first thing that I still think about is, hey, that day is coming. My health, I was diagnosed 20 years ago with MS. My wife has challenges here and there. We don't know if we're going to have to move into assisted living at some point. And I have a friend who has a mom in assisted living paying $6,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only going to keep going up. But so many people, when you look around, and they're in their 50s, and so or whatever, and they're looking at retirement, and they're like, well, Social Security is going to do this, is going to help with a lift, but and then they look back over their life and they look at these pots of these opportunities, like you said, your friend, and you don't get that time back. You don't get those choices back, and I think while we are all responsible for our own decisions, we live in a world where each generation gets easier and easier, and it gets harder and harder to do hard things. So my dad grew up on, and he would bemoan the fact to me that he had to feed chickens and milk cows every day before he got on the bus to school. And I'm like, well, yeah, Dad, well, let's keep it relative. So did everybody else that you went to school with.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody had cows and chickens in Alabama before they went to school in the rural areas. There's no doubt that I had a easier life in terms of comforts than my dad did. We had cable TV came around. He remembers when TV was invented, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I look at my daughters, even though we didn't have a lot, they've never known need. They've known plenty of want, but they've never known need. They've never had to walk into the door and say, hey, are we going to get to eat tonight? It's just the assumption. Hey, what are we having? Like, it's a guarantee food's going to be there. And you want that. You don't want your kids to be worried about adult things. You want them to enjoy being a kid. But they don't. We protected them from that. And then both my kids, both my children with my grandchildren, are teaching them different lessons. But it just gets harder and harder to say no because there's so much competition with what you're wearing. So you want to wear name brand, or you want to get this, and you want to get this car, you want to get this phone, you want to get, and it's just gimme. And our resources right now are plentiful. I'm not saying our money is, but we have access to basically anything we want in this country if we have the money to pay for it. So I'm saying all that to say, with each generation, it gets easier and easier. And so you say, okay, well, where's the real hardships? We went through COVID and you saw this country fold like origami, like in terms of the mental health, how we were taking, not leaving toilet paper for each other. Everybody's in panic mode and the shortage of everything. Because my grandparents went through the Depression. They saw what that was like. They used to save aluminum foil, and reuse it time and time again. So I'm saying at some point there'll be a generational reset to where we will be forced to experience. And when we do that, it will change some people. But I think to create a much larger paradigm, it's going to have to be something like that, where it's a true food shortage, or it's a plague of some type. Heaven forbid, I don't want this to happen. But, if something happened where, like a huge drought over the nation and we couldn't grow the amount of crops, all those kind of things are factors. Unfortunately, as long as we keep having things relatively easily like we do, it's hard to get people to set aside today for what's going to come 20 or 30 years from now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not just poverty people. It's middle class, and sometimes even bleeds over into the wealth class.
No, and I think that's great. I think what you just said was really important. I think because we came from that generation, maybe we're a generation or two removed, generation being somewhere between 17 and 20 years. We want our children to feel the pain that we had to go through.
Yeah.
Because our parents felt the pain and their parents felt the pain. And it's not to say that we can't afford it, but we want our children to realize that they have to work for it. My daughter said something to me last week, and it was a total head scratcher, and I still don't know what she was talking about. She said, "I'm spoiled." And I've never seen a child ever say that, ever. Yeah. And I was like, "What?" She's like, "I am so spoiled." I said, "Where did you get that from?" And she heard it from someone. Someone said, "Man, everything you want, your dad gives you, or whatever you guys want to go out to Zaxby's, he buys you dinner." It could have been coming from, one of these 5 kids in Shelby County that goes without a meal. And I was like, "Honey," I said, you're not spoiled." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll start saying no." "No, I don't want you to say no." And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Because whenever we do go out, but I make sure that when we do go out, and that's why I work. I mean, I work my ass off, so my kids can have good things."
Well, I tell you, it's interesting, that perspective, because, you said we want our kids to hurt. And I think I agree with you, but I think probably it's not that we want them to experience the pain. What we want them to do is to appreciate what they have and experience the lesson. Unfortunately, most people can't learn true value in life like that without going through pain. And so and look, I'll be the first to tell you, you tell me about how you're raising your kids, I can give you a million things to do differently. I'm the biggest hypocrite in the world, because I'd then turn around knowing in my mind that I'm fixing to do something that's not in my daughter's interest, but I love my children. And therefore I want them to learn the lesson, but I don't want them to experience the pain.
Yeah. And
so my heart wins out over my head too often, and I step in and they avoid the pain. And what I'm doing is I'm not preventing pain. Ultimately, I am prolonging, the pain, because at some point life's going to kick them in the teeth, and I'm not going to be there to shield them or protect them.
Yep.
And so that's that balance. We love our kids. We want them to learn lessons. We don't want them to be spoiled, but we don't want them to be mocked for not having go through the bullying and the teasing and all that, because that's painful for them. And before you know it, you look up one day and you're like, I've given them everything they've wanted. They don't value or appreciate things like they should, or they take it for granted, or at least that's a problem for a lot of children.
Well, and I think as a parent, when I said I want my kids to hurt, I don't ever want to see my kids not have what I had. But like you said, there's got to be a lesson learned there. And so I think the way we figure this out as people that, and listen, neither one of us are rich. It's not like, but if we have to if we need to go get a cheeseburger right now, we can. But I think I always think forward. I always think of paying it forward. Then I'm like, okay, so this, and my daughter will be the first one that will pull the car over and go pick up someone living under an overpass and put them in the backseat of the car. I'm like, no, we're not picking up the person. Why? They need to eat. They have nowhere to sleep. And I mean, she's compassionate that way. And I said, well, that's not how it works. I said, we can certainly point them in the right direction, help them, but I have to protect our family too. And so I'm always trying to think, okay, so if we are super blessed, and I want to make sure that we start every prayer with thank you for everything we have first. It's got to be that goes for before dinner, before we go to bed, and when we wake up in the morning. that we're super blessed. And then please place the people in my life that are in need of things I can help them with, whether it be money, whether it be my voice, whether it be a gift, whether it be whatever it is. So I can give back. And so you're right though, because when she said she was spoiled, someone got inside of her head and I was like, you're not spoiled. I said, you're not, trust me, you're not spoiled. You know, and I said, you're taken care of but that's because God blesses us, you know, and that's why I have to work. That's why when you want to do something that I can't, you know, it's just the way it is. And it's hard to say no when they're used to hearing yes all the time.
Very hard. You
know, my son, I'm going to see my son. I'm playing in a golf tournament tomorrow and, I'm going to see him in Clemson on Saturday, and he wants to go to the Clemson ball game. And Alabama's playing Georgia at the same time. And I was like, man, I'm not real crazy about going all the way to Clemson when I can watch this great game for free. Yeah. And then he's like, and then Sunday we're going to go to Carolina. I said, for what? He goes, the Bengals are playing the Carolina Panthers at 12 noon on Sunday. It's only 3 hours to the east. And I said, honey, I said, I can't.
You ask him what gold mine he discovered while he was at
I know. I said, Santo, I can't. And you know, I've gone over there several times. We've gone to some March Madness. We've done some things, you know, and I've saved up and I've tried to you know, experience those things because I know how much he loves going to see ball games with his dad. But I was like, Santo, I said, it's the end of the month. And I said, and I got to write a check to Clemson. And I said, I'm tapped out. Well, tickets are only going to be $75 a piece. I said, $75 a piece is $150. I said, that's a $600-$700 day. So I sat there on a piece of paper and started writing down hotel and gas and meals and this, that, and the other. I said, next thing you know, that's you know, half my mortgage. I said, that's you know,
100%.
So, you know, you don't want to spoil them. But you do want them to grow up and have the things that we didn't have. You know, one of the reasons that we didn't have a lot of the things our kids have is it didn't exist. Yeah. You know, we didn't have computers. We had bicycles, you know. Yeah. You know,
that's what I'm saying. It technology keeps making things easier and easier and easier.
And cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. You know?
So how do we teach those lessons? That's the challenge. Yeah. But I don't know. There's no easy answers, is it?
Well, I know I'm not having any more children, so I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
I don't need that in my life right now.
That's right.
Although God does have a sense of humor, so we'll see. Info at TonyCurryRadio.net, info at TonyCurryRadio.net. If you got any thoughts or anything else you want to talk about our particular show today, we'd love to hear from it. We do it every single week in Mission Mind. Of course, you can find the show. Keep in mind your mission your mind. You can find it wherever you find your favorite podcast. And coming up here next on these same stations, you'll be hearing BBB Bite by Bite. And of course, you can also hear that separated too, wherever you want to hear that thing right here on Tony Curry Radio.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Curry Radio.